Um, I'm going to, if you bear with me for just a moment. Uh, Welcome, everyone. This is our third talk of Psychology Day, psychology and mental wellness. And we are honored to have as our next speaker, Karen DuBois. Karen DuBois is the Program and Education Director at NAMI Acadiana, National Alliance for Mental Illness. She is a certified teacher and facilitator, a public speaker. She answers a crisis line 7 days a week, so very busy and very involved. Has a very varied set of interests and connections to the community through her church, through being a music director at First Lutheran Church. She has worked with county clerk's office. She has a number of different things to do that she has done. She is proudly has 2 daughters, 8 grandchildren, 5 great grandchildren, and near and dear to my heart, and I think many people, is a cancer survivor. So, and as far as I'm concerned, that's wonderful and heroic. So Karen today is going to be presenting on applying what you have learned to the reality of mental illness. And she mentioned, and I hope that she will continue to mention, that she will welcome any and all participation during the talk. And hopefully we will monitor chat comments as well. It is my honor, again, to turn things over to Karen DuBois. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity. I look forward to exchanging ideas with others that may have some questions. I'm never afraid of questions. As I had said earlier, if I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know. I want to help you to use what you've learned to the reality of lived mental illness. I've had many years of living with mental illness in my family. And as most people, until it manifested, I had absolutely no clue about anything relating to mental illness. You learn quickly. You don't have a choice. The only way to deal effectively with mental illness is education. And my students will hear me say very often, what is the cure for ignorance? Education. And you're doing this. And I'm really happy that you are pursuing this. I think it's extraordinarily important. We need more people working in this field. There just aren't enough people. And so I'm very encouraged that we have a chance to talk to those who are looking forward to a future where they will use their education to help others. So, applying what you've learned to the reality of lived mental illness. I would say probably in practical sense, if you go out into the field and you're beginning to work with people, or you have your own office, the first thing I would want to talk about is connecting. Connecting with someone who is likely in emotional turmoil is not easy. They may be undiagnosed, or properly diagnosed, or incorrectly diagnosed. Now, we know that this is a medical issue because it's a biological, physical illness. And that illness just happens to be in the brain. And so it requires medical treatment. Remember that what happens in the brain affects your whole body. Those that have mental illness often have more health problems than the general public. They should have a thorough physical, unless this is what the DSM-5 says. They should have a thorough physical before getting a mental illness diagnosis to rule out a physical issue that might not be tied to mental health issue, but it looks like mental illness. So that's the first thing that's supposed to happen. Rarely does, but that's what's supposed to happen. And here's something you need to tuck away in your brain. And this is a lot of experience that I've had. In fact, right now I'm dealing with my 92-year-old mother-in-law, whose brain is shrinking from a lobe atrophy and poor circulation in the cerebral cortex. The reason I bring up that is when an elderly person appears to have depression, they should first be given a urinalysis because more often than not, they have a bladder infection. This is from years of experience with this. So far, I've never been wrong. We have lots of people in nursing homes that are on antidepressants when they actually have a bladder infection. I just experienced this with my 92-year-old mother-in-law. We just moved her from Texas over here to Louisiana. And before she was moved, my husband was there, and he was trying to take care of her, and he called me because he was very perplexed by her behavior, really severe depression. And I said, first thing you need to do is get the nurse to do a urinalysis. And I was correct. It was a bladder infection. Medication, she was fine. So just tuck that away in your brain. A lot of people don't seem to know that. I cannot tell you why that it manifests in that way. I have no clue. And if you ever find out, I would love to know why, because that's something that's kind of perplexing. Anyway, that's just a little something. Tuck that away and keep that in your brain. Okay, now back to diagnosis. With time, diagnoses may change, or more than one diagnosis may be added. For instance, my oldest daughter has borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, PTSD, panic disorder, social anxiety disorder. Early on, to begin with, she started with ADD and dyslexia, which are often, with many people, the first diagnoses. It's usually termed ADHD, and with most of the population that I've dealt with, when they say, well, let me put it in the framework of asking a family member about their loved one and what their diagnosis is, and they always start with, well, when he was 7, he was diagnosed with ADHD. So it seems to be a beginning diagnosis. I don't know why. Maybe someday they'll determine why that seems to always be in the picture. But be aware of that. Inherent with most diagnoses is anxiety and much of the time paranoia. And that's pretty much everyone. They may have been unfairly criticized and blamed for their condition. If you had been unfairly criticized and blamed for your diagnosis or your condition, wouldn't that leave you defensive, resentful? You're not going to get someone to open up and talk if they do not trust you. So that's your first hurdle. Getting past the, I don't trust you, I don't want to talk. Not easy. Now, if the person has anosognosia, I need to add that in, because if they have anosognosia, and I'm hoping that you have learned about that. Anosognosia means that you cannot recognize that you have a mental illness. The area of the brain that has to do with insight is not properly formed. So they will never be able to recognize that they have a mental illness. You can well imagine that causes endless battles with family trying to get them help with them being in complete denial. It's not uncommon. I have read many things about schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, that there are estimates that 50% of those with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder have anosognosia, which is really a high percentage, because that means we're really going to have a lot of difficulty in serving these people and getting them the treatment that they need, that they don't know that they need. All right, family history. Family history is very important, especially with regard to mental illness, but many families remain in the dark about this issue. No one talks about it, or they simply don't know. In many cultures, the stigma associated with mental illness is so profound that even with all the problems that come with mental illness, it's referred to as something else, certainly not mental illness. So be aware that when you deal with some populations, their families are never going to want to admit that they have mental illness, because it's a cultural thing. That makes it difficult for you to help your client, of course. Count yourself blessed if you have some family history of mental illness that the client has told you about. Now, that family history of mental illness may or may not jibe with the diagnosis that they may have. So you need to be aware of that, because either later on they may manifest some of those other illnesses that have been mentioned in their family history. Be aware that if there is a family history of bipolar disorder and they are being diagnosed with depression, before anyone takes an antidepressant and there's a family history of bipolar disorder, you need to get, I hope you've been taught this, you need to get a mood stabilizer on board along with that antidepressant, because without it, it may kick them on over into full-blown bipolar disorder, which is called switching. When someone is given an antidepressant and there's a family history of bipolar, it may kick them over into bipolar disorder without a mood stabilizer on board, and that would be called switching. So far, anybody have any questions? Okay, keep that in mind. If you have a question about something or you want me to repeat something, please don't hesitate. I'm used to interactive. I love questions and I love to interact. Okay. Getting written authorization to talk or share with family members is ideal, but is usually difficult, especially if family relationships are fraught with drama, arguments, a lot of hurt. The family is not going to cooperate anyway, and probably your client doesn't trust any of the family members if this is the case. A lot of emotion there. There may be other family members who also have mental illness. Now, when we talk about family history, their history may not be the immediate family that they have. It may be my grandmother, my grandfather, my aunt, a generation or two. So it's very important when in your family you haven't experienced it, but there's a history earlier on. Sometimes it skips a generation. And of course, if there are other family members who have mental illness, that really complicates the issue, as you can well imagine, working with your client. It is destabilizing to have other family members who have mental illness, which may not be treated. So they're going to be dysfunctional. And we all know that with a dysfunctional family, you're going to have problems inherent with that. Any questions about that and family history? Okay, I'm going to move on to medication, which is a big issue. All right, medication, taken or not taken, of course, is an important part of the total picture for your client. Who is their doctor or nurse practitioner? What medications have been prescribed? And are they taking them? If not, why not? Now, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to remember this. It's extraordinarily important. Do not chastise them for not taking their medication. It's really easy to say, well, now you really should, don't do it. Why? Well, in the first place, it won't help. And the next time, they're just as likely to lie to you when you ask that question. Listen to their reasons. Listen to the reasons why they're not taking their concerns. They may be legitimate, or they may not. A 19-year-old young man is probably not going to be med compliant if his prescription meds leave him impotent. Just is what it is. A lot of doctors won't ask that question if that's the reason why, and a lot of clients that are in that age group are not going to bring that up. They're just not going to take the medication. So we need to open up with that, about that, and talk freely about that, because it's very important. A female is probably not going to be med compliant if their prescribed meds make them gain 20 pounds in a month. Listen to them. They need to be heard. If you're ever going to get them to open up and talk about all of their issues, you need to make sure that they feel like they are heard. Don't dismiss what they say. Listen to it. It may be legitimate. And we know that there may be some other solutions, and maybe you can help them find those solutions. But above all, they need to feel heard. Not all meds work for everyone. Having to try one or more meds, sometimes in combination with another med, in order to find meds that work and are tolerable, may have them taking 4 to 6 medications, which is a little frustrating if they don't see any effect with all these medications that they're on. It's hard to get someone to take medication when they don't see any improvement in their condition. The question will always be cost, which means the side effects. Is the cost, the side effects of the medications, worth the benefit? That's the effectiveness. If the cost is too great, they're not going to take them. I wager to say that we, with any other type of medication, had side effects that we felt like were intolerable, we would not continue to take the medication. We need to admit that they have a legitimate concern when the side effects are too great for them to tolerate. Now, this changing meds and moving on to something else and waiting for it to work and trying another one and it doesn't work, or it has too many side effects, we call that the medical merry-go-round. That's what family members refer to it as. It can take months, sometimes years, to find something that works, which can be very discouraging. You may have a client that comes in and says, oh, I've tried everything, nothing works, so I don't take medication. Well, that probably is from the viewpoint that they have tried a lot and nothing seems to help. Of course, we want to encourage them to continue to try. There are instances, and I know someone very well, I think she's 51, she has depression. It doesn't matter what medication she has taken, and they have tried everything on her. Every medication that she's ever taken causes suicidal ideation for her. So she's finally decided, I'm just not going to do it. I'll live with what I have to live with, but at least I don't feel suicidal all the time. So it can be difficult to find the right medications to work. Most people don't bother to read the literature that comes with medicine. If the family is involved, we recommend that they read all of the accompanying literature to see how many of these meds have the same side effects. For instance, what if 3 of the meds have weight gain as a side effect? You will have tripled the impact of weight gain. That's a recipe for disastrous weight gain. It's very hard to get it off. We now know that psychotropic drugs that people have taken for many years are responsible for the epidemic of diabetes in the mental health community. We traded one problem for another problem, and diabetes is epidemic. What's the solution? Sometimes the new meds are good, sometimes they're not. Sometimes the old meds are better, and they are going back to a lot of older meds like lithium. When it, pardon me, when it works really well. Now you have to be monitored and have blood draws, which a lot of people don't like, but it has proved to be one of the better older medicines, and that's why they're coming back to it, because it does work so well. Now, one thing that you need to know with your clients, if they're on lithium and it's working well, every time they get back on lithium, it doesn't work as well if they quit taking it. And that is a big concern, especially if you find something like that that works. You need to encourage them to stay on it, because it does not work as well if they've been off of it again and tried it again. It just doesn't work as well. So finding something that works is, as we know, extraordinarily important. And with them experimenting with on-off sometimes is going to make something more difficult for them in the long run. Yes.
You encouraged interaction, so I'm going to go ask you a question.
Yes.
You mentioned, you dropped the sort of unfortunate dynamic between psychotropic medications and diabetes.
Yes.
I was wondering, like for anybody who in the audience who was curious about diving in deeper to that topic, where would you recommend that people go to read more about that and learn more about that topic of the interaction between
since that is in our curriculum that we teach, I'm positive you can go to the NAMI, NAMI.org. Many excellent articles on any topic having to do with mental illness there. It's a treasure trove of information. And I know that we have been concerned for the last 10 years about the health aspects concerned with medications and the fact that people have health problems because of the medications. It's a dance. Is it working? Wonderful. Is it causing other problems that may be more serious? Yeah. A lot of good information on the NAMI.org website.
One other question related to that, I thought it was such a big topic, you kind of mentioned, so
Yeah.
like ask about it, is based upon what you've been taught in your curriculum and what you know, is there particular psychotropic meds that have a strong sort of interaction with diabetes, or is it psychotropic medications as a huge class?
As a huge class, I don't think they pinned it down. It's one of those things that they suddenly realize, oh my goodness, look what we have. We have epidemic of diabetes. And so I think they are still finding out the whys about why it has caused this. My own daughter has diabetes now and has taken psychotropic medication for many years. When I had cancer, I was taking all those anti-cancer supplements, these big bullets, and I've never been really excited about taking medication to begin with, but I did it because I knew it was important that I do it. And one morning I was complaining about having to take those things, and my daughter looked at me and she said, all those psychotropic drugs that I take, Mom, I hate taking them, but I take them because I have to. That kind of shut me down. I never complained again, because the reality is those drugs do have a physical effect on their bodies. Most people that have been taking these meds, let's just generalize, and I can do this because I know it's true. People who have mental illness and probably have been taking psychotropic drugs, whether they're med compliant all the time or not, have more physical health problems than the general public. And quite honestly, they have shorter lifespans. And it has to have something to do with that. Medications can feel like wonder drugs because they accomplish what they're hoping to when they have designed these drugs. But you're going to also recognize that those drugs, they're not a silver bullet. Let me put it that way. They're more like buckshot. They hit the target and everything else around it. So that's why you'll find that some of the drugs have had a not so good effect on the rest of the body. In fact, that's something that I would like to talk about. Some drugs can cause tardive dyskinesia, which is characterized by repetitive involuntary movements such as facial grimacing, blinking, shrugging, tongue protrusion, like licking your lips constantly. I know someone who doesn't have mental illness, and her medication I've noticed, has caused that. When you see that manifesting, the tardive dyskinesia, be aware that they need to get off of that drug right away. Because if they continue taking it, the tardive dyskinesia may become permanent. Hopefully, if they get off of it, maybe put on something else, those involuntary movements may go away. My grandson was on something, I think it was Risperdal, from the time he was 3. And he had lots of tics and shrugging, and I was very concerned that it might be tardive dyskinesia. And since he had been on it for so many years, I wanted to get him off of it, and let's see if those things go away. Fortunately, those things have abated. He doesn't have that anymore, and he's 21 now. So sometimes those things will go away, and we're always hopeful that when someone gets off of something, that it's going to abate and you don't have a problem with that anymore, and they have to take something else. But the danger is that it might be permanent, and they'll be stuck with the facial grimacing, and Anybody that does that sticks out like a sore thumb in public. That does not help them to fit in because it's so noticeable. So that's one thing, some of these drugs, while they help with one thing, they may cause a problem in the other. All right, let's get back to the lack of med compliance because it is a big issue. That's probably one of the biggest issues that our family members come to us with. How do I get them to keep taking their meds? It's a big issue. And probably the most serious one that family members deal with in a loved one who has mental illness. We have a good friend who has schizophrenia. He has written 18 books. One's been made into a movie. Pardon me. Every once in a while, he gets off his meds because he says they dull his creativity, and they do. They do. But when we see that his sleep cycle is turned upside down and he's staying up all night, and by the way, with mental illness, the sleep cycle is paramount to being in recovery. If they do not have a good sleep cycle, sleeping at night, you're going to have problems. We usually recommend, and I know it's not always possible, that someone with mental illness should not work at night. That circadian rhythm is just really important for our bodies and our brains, particularly for somebody who has a mental illness. It has an effect. Okay, so when we recognize that his sleep cycle is turned upside down and he's staying up all night, we know that he's gotten off of his meds and he's writing. He's gotten off his meds and his behavior reflects it. We can tell. We know that it's time to check in with him. You're off your meds again, aren't you? And he'll usually admit it. Well, I feel like I write better when we understand that, but you don't want to end up in the hospital. So, you have to be respectful and encourage people that do that. It's not a good thing. When my daughter has run out of a medication, she panics. She knows she's got to stay on those medications. When she was in Illinois a number of years ago, she ran out of Ziprasidone, Geodon, and she ended up in the emergency room. She said, "Mom, the withdrawal was horrible. I never want to go through that again." So it happened like that again. Last year, I was in the car heading to the LSUE library. I was going to give a talk, and she called me and said, "Mom, I have run out of Ziprasidone, and I don't know what to do. I don't know why I've run out of it." And the owner of the clinic where she goes is a good friend, fortunately for her. And I called him and said, her nurse practitioner needs to call her right away. And he did. And she got her medication by that evening. And, but the thing is that they don't always have somebody to advocate or intervene for them. And that can really be a problem because most people do not see their doctor maybe for 3 months. And so in between, if there's a problem or they run out of something, let me say that the addition of nurse practitioners, psych nurse practitioners, has for us and for our loved ones who have mental illness been phenomenal. Because you can talk to the nurse practitioner, you can get hold of the nurse practitioner, and they can do something. if the medication is having some unwanted side effects. If there's any other kind of problem, you're not going to get to talk to the doctor, but you can talk to the nurse practitioner, and it has just been amazing. We love psych nurse practitioners. They have revolutionized the ability of anyone with mental illness to be able to get a response when they have a problem. And anytime I lecture nursing students, I encourage them to go further with their education and become a psych nurse practitioner, because we need them. Okay, so when you have a client that is prone to getting on and off their medications, you need to make sure that they know that when they do that, that medication is probably not going to work as well when they try to get back on it, because it's a cumulative effect in their body. And they, if they haven't had withdrawal symptoms, they're blessed, because those withdrawal symptoms can be pretty horrific. Speaking of our friend that has written all those books, we find that he's amazing. He's in his 70s. He has an AOC show that he's had for 19 years. I've never met anyone with mental illness that isn't highly intelligent and talented. Not one. That, to me, says it all. Why we need to be concerned about people that have a mental illness. They're all highly intelligent. Now, that may be tempered with brain damage caused by street drugs. That does happen. Can also be brain injury from an accident. I've also seen an accident with brain injury that has caused the manifestation of mental illness. We've had two mothers that came to us, sons that were the golden child, had all these scholarships to LSU, were doing beautifully, and they both, it just so happened that both of these young men were in an accident, and the left temporal lobe was where the damage was, and they started manifesting schizophrenia. So for all intents and purposes, they had schizophrenia and had to be treated for schizophrenia. So brain damage can, in a certain area of the brain, can manifest in a mental illness that has to do with that area of the brain. It's important, and this is something that I want you to know, that you have to emphasize to your client. Psychosis, and I'm sure you know what that is, a break with reality, causes brain cells to die. Every time someone goes into psychosis, brain cells die. And for someone that has mental illness, that is extraordinarily important to try to keep them, make every effort to keep someone from going into psychosis for that one reason alone. Well, there's something else too that I want to tell you about. Cortisol, the stress hormone, it also kills brain cells. In fact, specifically, it kills glial cells. Glial cells support and nourish the neurons in your brain. Really important. None of you have any stress, do you? Cortisol, it does kill brain cells, specifically glial cells. Autopsied brains of those who have an unregulated bipolar disorder and high levels of stress, now this is the autopsy, showed that cortisol, the stress hormone, had killed off 90% of the glial cells by the time of death. That blew me away. That's scary and tragic. I mean, that's That's huge. So stress is far more damaging than we realize. It's not only damaging to our bodies, and we know that. We know that stress is not a good thing. But it seems like, and I'm sure you agree with me, it seems like every year our life gets more stressful. Whatever is happening in the world, in our own state, say, or in our own families. It just seems like stress is getting more and more, and it is the number one trigger for mental illness. The number one trigger. Reducing stress is extraordinarily important, not always easy to do. Someone may have a very fast-paced job, which demands put on that person that cause that person to be in a state of hyped up, got to work as fast as I can, I've got to get this done. You got to weigh working in a job like that for a long period of time is going to have a really bad effect on your brain and your body. So we always encourage people to find ways to de-stress. Find ways to de-stress. I call it feeding your own soul. We tell family members, you need to find ways to de-stress yourself. You need to take care of yourself, because if you go down, then your loved one has no one to advocate for them. That's not easy in our world. We all know that we wish we had less stress, and sometimes you can't avoid it, but find ways to counteract it. You need to encourage your clients to counteract it in some way. Do they enjoy doing a particular activity? It doesn't mean it has to be something that's expensive or takes very long. Some people like to go out and dig in the garden, or love to go fishing. Everyone needs to have a fallback that helps them to de-stress in the world that we live in, but most especially for someone that has mental illness. They need to have something that helps them to counteract the amount of stress they might be feeling. I know that with my daughter, when she was under stress, she was having multiple panic attacks. And we know those are, if you've ever had one of those, they're horrifying. You feel like you're dying. And when you have multiple of those, you can imagine how stressful you feel like your life is. So stress can cause a lot of different things that are all, and they're all harmful to our bodies and our brains. I think that at this point, you can see that helping someone find effective treatment is of paramount importance. Now, I want to return to psychosis. Trying to reason with someone or argue with someone who is in psychosis is fruitless. Why? Because their reality is not the same as your reality. You have to have a shared reality to communicate with someone. We have to both have an understanding to be able to communicate with each other. And when someone is in psychosis, they definitely are not sharing the same reality with you. We might as well be speaking Italian and they're speaking Greek. They can't understand what you're saying, and by and large, you probably don't understand what they're talking about. So I know that it's tempting to try to reason with someone who's in psychosis. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. And until they come down from that state of psychosis, anything you do is not going to make sense to them. They will be uncooperative. I don't know how many times I've told people, don't try to argue with someone or reason with someone who's in psychosis. And I did find myself one day, now in my defense, my daughter had sunglasses on and I couldn't see her eyes. And she was going to do something which I knew was very harmful, not good. And I was trying to reason with her. And about 30 minutes later, she took off her sunglasses and I realized she was in psychosis. And I was doing what I had been telling people not to try to do. It is fruitless. So recognizing when somebody is in psychosis is very important. You want to work with somebody as much as you can, but if they're in psychosis, you're not going to be successful. They probably have gotten off their meds, and you need to encourage them to see their doctor, call the nurse practitioner, or if the family's involved, hopefully you've had permission to talk with the family and have the family get involved. And the family can often get them the help that they need. You do not have that ability. They're your client, but you don't have a power of attorney that's granted you the ability to do that. And it can be quite frustrating that you care about your clients, but unless a family is involved, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. I know that would have to be really frustrating.
I'm going to interject also in terms of just a comment earlier that Caramillo had shared, just in case anybody missed it on the chat, just related to that whole conversation about diabetes and mental health treatment. She is our faculty member who teaches about the brain and behavior. Yes. So she pointed out that kind of echoing in some ways, overlapping a little bit with what you're saying about she said many animal researchers are researching the causal connection between depression and diabetes, and that it may be related to malfunctioning protein synthesis is at least one thing that's being looked at.
Yes, it's a fascinating, for me, brain research is fascinating. I love it. And the thing that's sad for our family members and clients is that when there's exciting news in research, it may take 10 years for that to translate into practical use, but it is exciting. And I have had a contact with the Harvard Brain Bank, and I highly encourage people, and I tell our family members this, the Harvard Brain Bank gets all the brain samples, the brains, when people die, but you have to make prearrangements. At one time, I don't know what the number is now, they were only getting 35 brain specimens a year. And they send out all of the samples to research laboratories that have anything to do with brain research. So I encourage family members to fill out the applications for their loved one who has a mental illness, if they're agreeable to that. And because it all has to be done quickly, the brain deteriorates quickly after death. Organ donation is fabulous and wonderful, and I have very dear friends who have been recipients. But I'm also an advocate of brain donation, and you cannot do both, because while you can have things in suspended, you can hold them, the organs, for a certain period of time. You can't do that with the brain. It all has to go really fast. They would like to have the brains of those that have a diagnosis, but they also would like to have a control group of family members that also would be willing to have their brains sent also after death. We've had people that have done this. They have signed up, had all of the paperwork in place, but something happened and their loved one OD'd and died. Well, that means the police are involved, the tape goes up, especially if that person has gone to another city, like her loved one went to New Orleans and took her life in the hotel room there. And so all bets are off. It doesn't matter if they have paperwork that says their brain is go. When the when the yellow tape goes up, that goes out the window. And she was very disappointed because her other child had hung himself and she wanted to do something that would make an impact, which it will, because they need more brain specimens. So just throw that, interject that in there. Look up Harvard Brain Bank. Very important. Brain research is where we're going to get our answers.
Very invaluable. I have another question that I'm going to. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to first state the question as written.
Okay.
I'm going to restate the question slightly differently from my point of view. So here's the question as written by Emily Wilcox from our audience. She wrote, in the view of being a loved one of someone who has mental illness, what's the best approach to take to pull them out of psychosis? My slight rephrase of the question would be, what would you tell a loved one of somebody who is experiencing psychosis, or how the role you can play and how you can be best helpful for them?
Probably one of the most important things that a family member can do, if they're allowed to, is for them to say to that person, well, you might not have the same reality. I see that you're struggling. I see that there are certain things that you're thinking that I recognize when you get off your medication. Have you gotten off your medication? Because that's really important for the family member to know that they have gotten off their medication. And more often than not, that's usually the cause. So that family member, as I said, you can't argue with them. Reality is perception. And for that person in psychosis, their perception of reality can be bizarre. And of course, that's how you recognize when somebody's in psychosis, that their behavior or the things they're saying are bizarre. If possible, if you can, we tell our family members, if they'll allow you, take them to see their nurse practitioner. If you feel like it's getting to the point where it's very dangerous for them, going to the ER can be very dissatisfying, especially if you have to sit in the ER and wait. For the person that is in psychosis, it makes no sense. And to begin with, if they're in psychosis, if the psychosis includes suspicion that someone is trying to kill them, their cooperation is probably going to be nil, because they may not trust you. But I think you make every effort to be very calm, never agitated. You have got to remain calm. Keep your voice low. Act like you don't have a care in the world, because you want to lower their agitation. Many people that are in psychosis are very agitated, and you want to try to lower that agitation. You don't know how long it's going to take for them to come out of that psychosis. And sometimes they don't come out of that psychosis until they're put on meds. And that may have to be at a facility. because psychosis is dangerous. But we always tell family members, remain calm. Keep your voice low. Speak softly. You try to lower that anxiety level as much as you can, as much as you can do. And then after that, getting them help is important. Does that answer your question?
She's having to type, so as she doesn't trust her microphone, she said yes.
Yes. I mean, some of the things that they may be saying are very alarming to you. You cannot show alarm. You've got to keep yourself in a very calm demeanor. If you get upset, it's going to make it worse. So, and that's the same thing that we have trained a number of police officers in the crisis intervention team trainings, and that's the same thing we tell law enforcement. When you have a situation with mental illness and that person may be in psychosis, don't approach both of you. One, hang back, because they usually are in two-person teams. Keep your hand off of your gun. Speak softly, not threatening. And this is totally opposite of the way law enforcement is trained. They're trained to aggressively take command of the situation, show their authority, and you can't do that with someone that has mental illness. It will only make it worse. And sometimes a police officer, if he's trained to understand how to deal with someone with mental illness in any situation, can calm the situation enough that that person can be taken, say, to the hospital instead of jail. So that is really important too, that we know that how we deal with somebody who is agitated or who is in psychosis can make all the difference in the world, how the situation turns out. Okay. Answers? I want to get back to the high intelligence. And I do sincerely mean that. I've never met anyone with mental illness that isn't highly intelligent. Just because they have mental illness doesn't mean they suddenly become stupid. And so I've been amazed at how many people think that. The mental illness uses that high intelligence to defend itself. They can become proficient at manipulation because it's a defensive coping skill to protect itself as the illness sees it. It will protect itself. That illness, if the illness is in charge, the illness will use that high intelligence. They can be extraordinarily clever at manipulation. And at times you might find yourself on the receiving end of that manipulation. In fact, I would wager to say you will many times be the recipient if you're trying to work with someone that has mental illness. It's a maladaptive coping skill, but it's quite effective. It's amazing that families can take their loved one to an emergency room, and because of their behavior has been bizarre and the things they've been doing, and the ER doctor talks to them for about 10 minutes, and it's amazing how symptomatic the behavior has been, but when they get in front of the ER doctor, they're perfectly fine. I don't know what the family's talking about. There's nothing wrong with me, as you can see. And the doctor says, well, I have to make my judgment call on what I see in front of me, and I don't see anything wrong with this person. They can do that for, especially if they're symptomatic, they can manage to pull it together for 10 or 15 minutes. And like I said, they're intelligent. They fooled many ER doctors into releasing them. And the family is like, what? Do you know what they've been doing? Doesn't make any difference. The ER doctor goes on what he sees in front of them. When a family gets an OPC, an an order of protective custody from a coroner, there are three criteria: harm to self, harm to others, and an inability to take care of their daily needs, food, clothing, housing. Even when there is an order of protective custody, law enforcement will tell you it's nothing more than a ride to the ER. If in that order of protective custody, it states that they have threatened suicide, and the ER doctor says, are you going to commit suicide? Or do you want to commit suicide? And they say, no. The ER doctor says, well, he says he's not going to commit suicide, so got to let him go. And the family is distraught because they're terrified that their loved one is going to commit suicide. And they've done what they are supposed to do: get an order of protective custody, have them taken to the ER. It happens all the time. It happens all the time. The ER doctor can look at that order of protective custody and then say, okay, well, that's what they said. I'm talking to you, and you say, I'm not going to commit suicide. So the doctor takes the word of the one that has a mental illness, because they're saying, I'm not going to do that. Okay, then go and be well. It's really frustrating for families. It's hard enough to take that first step: one, to go to the coroner, or two, to call law enforcement. That's a hard thing to do for any family members. And you can imagine why, because the family member that has mental illness is going to be mad. How could you do that to me? You put me in a hospital. And that's one of the reasons why family members don't often act, because they're afraid their loved one's going to be mad at them. Sometimes we have to act even when we don't want for them to be mad at us, because it's life-saving. It isn't always easy for family members to do what we know needs to be done. So we try to encourage them to, especially if there's any type of violence involved. You have to do something. You have to act. The fact is that if someone is in effective treatment and they're taking their prescribed meds, they are no more violent than you or I. If they're in effective treatment and if they're taking their meds, they're no more violent than you or I are. However, statistics show, particularly in mentally ill males who are not in treatment or taking meds, are 6 times more aggressive or violent and possibly dangerous. That's not something that we like to hear, but it's the truth. And as if you're going to work in the field of psychology, you need to know that, say, if you're a woman and you have a client comes in that's a male and he's gotten off his meds and is not in effective treatment, you need to be aware of that. Trust your instincts. You always are of the mind that you want to help that person, but you need to trust your instincts. And if they seem a little aggressive, be aware. If they're not on medication or effective treatment, they may be dangerous to you or themselves or to other people. Does anybody have a question about that aspect of mental illness? It's really hard for people to call the police when their mentally ill loved one is acting out, especially in family circumstances. Mom or dad, well, I don't want them to be mad at me. But they're breaking in the door to get in. Or they're destroying things in the house. Now, we have had a number of family members who we've worked with. One instance I'm thinking about, their son, he was at LSU when he was mugged and robbed, and it really flipped a switch with him. And he manifested schizophrenia. They got him home, and he was in treatment, and then he stopped taking his meds, and his behavior became somewhat severe, aggressive, rather threatening. And he was indicating that he was going to do something to somebody. And he went into his room. His mother had been in the kitchen cutting up some vegetables with a knife. And she became alarmed. She grabbed everybody has a ring binder when we teach class, they have it with them. We recommend keep this where you can get your hands on it if you need to refer to it, what to do in these circumstances. And she said, I went out the kitchen window with that book, and my husband grabbed the knife and went out the same window so that he couldn't have the knife. I'm glad to say that it turned out well, but they did what they needed to do to get out of that situation where they might have come to harm. And the police did end up being called, but they got themselves out of the situation. And by the way, don't ever stand in front of somebody that's mentally ill, that's aggressive, that wants to go out that door. If you're the family member and your mentally ill loved one wants to leave, and you know that maybe they're going into a dangerous situation, the tendency is to try to stop them. Don't. They will go through you. And chances are you're going to get hurt. It's hard to let somebody go when you know they may be going out on the street, which can be dangerous. Drugs, robbers, but somebody that is in mental illness and is aggressive, the chances are they're going to be dangerous to you if you try to stop them from doing something. We've had it happen, and I don't recommend it. They will go through you to get out that door. We have a society that's largely poorly educated about mental illness. I'm sure you're aware of that. When we try to get help for our loved one, there's a lack of available services. I'm sure you're all aware of that. If the lack of available services means that your loved one is going to continue to deteriorate while you're trying to find more services, you're going to be losing a lot of people whose family would like to get them help but can't get the services. When I talk to family members, one of the first things I'll ask them is, are they on Medicaid? If they're not, go online, get them on Medicaid immediately, because otherwise it's going to be cash. And most families of the mentally ill have spent every dime they have trying to get help for their loved one. So financing is an issue, a big issue, but lack of available services, because there's simply not enough, is due to lack of funding. Unless we educate the public to understand mental illness, they're not going to care because of their misconception about mental illness. It's somebody's fault. It's not somebody's fault. It's largely hereditary. There are some triggers, environmental triggers that can bring it out. And like I said, street drugs and brain injury also, but it's not that person's fault. And this is what we tend to want to do when we don't understand something, particularly mental illness. People say, oh, well, that family, that would never happen in our family, which I find amusing, because mental illness is an equal opportunity illness. It can hit any strata of society, from the wealthiest to the poorest, whatever culture you come from. The incidence of schizophrenia worldwide is 2%. It doesn't matter where you are. It's the human condition. So we need to stop blaming people and blaming families. For many years, thank you, Freud, mothers were blamed. We blamed mothers for autism. Now we know mothers didn't cause autism. And that's why a lot of families were shut out, because they were blamed. It's an illness. It's a medical illness. It needs to be treated medically. And we need to do as much as we can to educate people to understand that it's a biological physical illness in the brain. It is a brain disorder. We have many disorders. You have autism. You have seizures in relation to a number of illnesses. We don't blame people for that. My youngest daughter works with a young man who has a Dravet syndrome. It's a seizure syndrome. And he was perfectly neurotypical until he was 3, and then it hit and he started having seizures, and now he has a very limited vocabulary as he grows. But nobody has blamed his mother for that. We, as a society, we largely blame the families for their ill loved one. And that's why a lot of people don't talk about it. Go ahead.
I'll just say, we're getting a little short on time here.
Sure.
And so I wanted to we still have a little time if there was if there are questions, or if there was a final point that you didn't get a chance to make that bring home, that we have a few minutes.
Absolutely.
But we're going to need to wrap up in probably about 5-6 minutes.
That's exactly what I had in mind.
Awesome.
We're on point. Okay. Unless somebody has a question.
Ms. DuBois,
Yes.
I wanted to thank you for the many, many good points that you have made. And I think it's particularly potent in the voice of family members who have different types of mental illnesses and the many challenges that there are for family members. But Ms. DuBois, I think one of the most important things you've done today is give people hope that there are resources
Yes,
and that family members can make a difference while also being very realistic about what the limits can
Right.
be, for that. And I'm very appreciative of, that healthy balancing in your realism. I think that's been extremely beneficial. And I want to thank you for that.
I appreciate that. And on that note, NAMI, everything we do is free. All of our programs. We will send to anyone or give to anyone. These are brochures on all the mental illnesses, anxiety disorders. We have those too. I mail out hundreds of these. Now, we also have 2 support groups. Family support group. Again, everything we do is free. Due to the pandemic, we had to cut down how many family meetings we have. So we have one once a month, the first Sunday at First Lutheran Church from 6 to 7:30. Don't have to register. Just come in, and if you want to talk, you can talk. If you don't want to talk, you can sit there and listen to everyone else. It will help you a great deal to realize you are not alone in this. And we also have Connection Recovery Support Group. My husband and I both facilitate support groups. The Connection Group meets the 3rd Sunday of the month at First Lutheran Church from 6 to 7:30. And we also have 2 more Connection Recovery Support Groups, because I think it's extraordinarily important to provide as much as possible for the family member that has the illness. The main library on Congress, there's a meeting from 3 to 4, the 1st and 3rd Wednesdays. So we have 3 meetings for Connection Recovery and also our education classes. My husband and I trained to teach family to family, which is for family members. It's an 8-week course, once a week from 6:30 to 9 o'clock. I provide a meal before the class, since I wanted to get a lot of men there, and they're not going to come to a class if they haven't eaten after they've gotten off work. So I get a lot of men. It's a phenomenal course. I've seen whole families turn around and lives saved. It's incredible curriculum. And my husband and I have been teaching that class since we were the first ones to teach it in Louisiana since January of 2008. We teach 2 classes a year. And my husband also teaches a peer-to-peer class, which is the class for someone who has a diagnosis, because we firmly believe that education about their own illness is a huge step into recovery, right? Education, know your illness. You would not send someone away from the hospital like, well, we've diagnosed you with this, go and be well. If someone is diagnosed with diabetes, they will explain to you what you have to do to successfully live with diabetes. And the same thing with mental illness. Learning to understand about those illnesses creates an absolute direct route to recovery. It's for the family members also. When their loved one is in recovery, they have to recover too. And so we recommend that they take every opportunity to educate themselves. And we've got some pretty good curriculum to accomplish that for them. We encourage everyone to call. I take calls 7 days a week. My phone is my office, because I believe there was someone there when our life literally exploded. There was someone there for us. Happened to be good friends that we'd already known for many years. And I believe that it's extraordinarily important for someone to be there and for you to call when you don't know what else to do, when you don't understand. And most people don't understand illness. We got to educate those high school students. That's what I want to do. Get them before they get out into the world, so that they're comfortable talking about mental illness and recognizing the symptoms. Saves a lot of lives. And that's what we're all about, is saving these lives of these valuable, bright, wonderful people. If we all work together, we can do that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. There is so much, I think, that is, for those students who are watching this talk or who are here today that are learning all sorts of the scientific sorts of research and the data. And I appreciate that you're referencing the NAMI website, because, it's a good way, right, of seeing, okay, well, what's been written about it? What are the things that we're saying based on, which is always a good idea, right? For us to always sort of take that wisdom and then trace it backwards. Okay, where did that come
Right.
from? Or where
Right.
that information come from? I always tell that to the people that I teach classes with, right? Is that I throw in the little things that I've learned with experience, and I say, double check me.
Right.
I
love research. I love
Yeah.
reading about these things. There's always something you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there is so much value in people like yourself who have the years of hard-won experience of, in some cases, learning the hard way how putting some of these things in practice always has an additional piece to it. And I hope everyone here who has an interest in doing applications will have multiple people that are willing to spend time sharing their experience and having us benefit from the wisdom, and we can each become our little Venn diagram of multiple people's wisdom,
Right.
building on that. So I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us today, and it's been I think it's been interesting for a lot of people here today to just hear some of that practical kinds of things that people learn, and those heuristic sorts of ways of sort of capturing general strategies in the real world, like you said, on the ground. Even for those of us who aren't going to be involved in applied work, it's a little nice glimpse into that, into that little corner of the
Well,
world.
the public needs to be educated just as well as anybody else.
Right. So, so thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I'm going to, and I think that those are all the comments that I was able to get from the chat. So just a reminder to everybody, there's another talk that's going to start up in just a few minutes. We're going to open up the new meeting probably like in 5 minutes or less. So so you guys take care, and please take care of yourselves. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.